do. This year the Queen Quet one more again coming to 100 children for this year Gullah Geechee Nayshun Nyews. Now 100 children know and 100 to deal with me, they're going all kind of rest of place and things like that. And yeah, there's plenty of water going on down here in we islands called the sea islands. And there no such a thing as Gullah islands, the sea islands and things like that here in the Gullah Geechee Nation. Now plenty of time when 100 to see me, you see me pon the land and things like that, they're going everywhere. But this year, we got somebody who get off the land just a little bit into the cricket thing and get down there in the mud and thing. 100 children just be to walk across and thing. Now study about what day they're underneath there. Now see, I'm not scared, 100 just carry your shoes and things to the beach. But look here, we got today Sister Dr. Dionne Hoskins from over at SSU in Savannah, over in Soho. How are you to do today?
I'm good, thank you.
Well, we're so glad if I have Hannah on here.
Thank you.
So now, you are what type of biologist, Dr. Hoskins?
I'm a benthic ecologist.
Now, that's an interesting name, a benthic ecologist. What does benthic mean?
It means the bottom. It means the bottom, so in areas like coastal Georgia and South Carolina, it's the muddy sediments. But if you're in the tropics, it would be the corals, it's the bottom, it even would be the deep sea. So it's animals with the bottom.
Okay, and someone else might say, well, that's great, you define benthic. I don't even know what ecologist means. So just in case.
Thanks for that.
What is ecologist?
An ecologist is someone who looks at communities and looks at habitats and how organisms get along living in the same place.
Now that's an interesting statement, especially when we talk about the Gullah Geechee Nation, how organisms get along living in the same place. Because a lot of people who know about Gullah Geechee culture know there are always political dynamics to how the human organisms get along in the same place. So today you're talking to the Gullah Geechee Fishing Association though about the human impact on the creatures that are at the bottoms, as you were talking about. Why is that important? I mean, like, why should we care? I mean, we don't eat them, so if we don't eat them, should we care?
But something that we eat eats them, and that's why we care. We care because the environment is interrelated, and because maybe the species that live on the bottom aren't important to us, but they're important to the animals that are important to us, like blue crabs and shrimp and flounder and lobster and bottom-feeding fish like croaker and mullet. They need the animals to live on the bottom, and if we do things that interfere with the quality of life on the bottom, then that's going to radiate up the food chain and it's going to eventually hit us where we feel it, like in the grocery store.
Interesting, and that's a good point. Definitely with the hitting in the grocery store. But then how about in a community like ours that's a traditional community that still goes out and gathers their own food? They don't necessarily rely on the grocery store, so they might hear you say they're coming and say again, but it don't matter to me because I just going out there and get somebody coming in. So again, why should they care about the bottoms if they just really want these creatures on top? Because the bottom to us a lot of times is just blue crab, for instance. But you're talking about even below them,
I'm
right?
talking about below them. You know, in very fine sediments, you get small creatures like small worms called nematodes or small crustacea called copepods, and they are the food for bottom-feeding fish that are often the food for pelagic larger fish. And so the way that food webs interact is that you have some species that maybe just eat plants, or then some animals that only eat animals that eat plants, and so you have
vegetarians.
Yeah, you have vegetarians in the water, but you also have, you know, top predators that rely on fish that eat smaller fish, and those smaller fish eat smaller things that live in the bottom.
So again, like the perpetual food chain, like we're always taught as children. And I know I have young people that watch this show, and they're hearing what we're talking about. I'm sure some of them are thinking of SpongeBob.
And SpongeBob does live in the benthos. That's true.
Okay.
But you know, there's other things that they're nasty things that can find their way into the sediments, and you know, like pollutants, like PAHs, polyaromatic hydrocarbons. Heavy metals, petroleum products that find their way from parking lots and from boats in the water. Those kind of contaminants can get into the sediments, and then the foods that the animals that we like to eat as food can take in those sediments, and they'll either die or they can be sick and pass on those metals to us. The same way we can get mercury from fish.
I was just going to ask you that question.
Same thing.
I was just about to ask you that because that is a big issue, that we have places that get closed off. for instance, because they'll say the mercury levels are too high. But to a lot of older Gullah Geechees, they're trying to understand, what do you even mean by this? And how does mercury get in our waterway in the first place? Much less then, like you're saying, it's from the fishes and so on, eating the other things that are in it that we don't pay attention to, that may have these high pollutants in it. But how does the mercury get there for them to consume?
Well, I mean, it could come from badly managed waste, you know, batteries, industrial products, runoff, so you can have non-point source runoff, you can have runoff that finds its way into the environment from areas that we really can't identify, or you can have manufacturing plants that are not handling their waste properly and it gets its way into the environment. And then there's the natural chemistry of the environment that allows some pollutants to get moved around in different ways than others.
Okay, and now, what do you think? Do you think that a massive amount of people eating, because I know a big deal with the Gullah Geechee Fishing Association are the legal restrictions, like the size of fish, or the amount of fish, or the amount of oysters or crabs that you can obtain. Based on a lot of what you're saying though, the scientists say, well, we have pollutants in this area, and y'all harvest from this area, so now we have to restrict your harvesting. You can only get X amount. But how do you really feel as a scientist? Does that really shift over time? And should the legislative bodies be more flexible about being able to listen more to those who harvest so that they know when that change has come, where, let's say it's been replenished in a more positive, productive way where you don't have these pollutants?
Well, I think that good policy is founded on good science, and good science is reliant on, you know, having good information. And so I think that one of the challenges that scientists and the government may have is communicating the why. Okay. Why is something, why is an area not a good place to collect? Why is an area a very good place to collect? Why does it need to be protected? A lot of the decisions that we make about how and when and where and how many fish or other organisms we can collect are dependent on the life history of that organism, what its needs are, in the case of pollutants, what it has been exposed to. For oysters, you know, we have a period of deparation, that is where we're in a period of time where the oysters clean their system out, and so oyster fisheries will be closed because science has told us that for this amount of time, oysters will need to clean themselves, and then after they get cleaned, then oyster collecting will be reopened. And so I think it's having examples where we've had good science be communicated in a way that everybody can understand it, so that decisions like that can be understood. Now, people don't complain if there's been a big E. coli epidemic. People don't complain the oysters are closed, because they are understanding totally what is happening. If we could do that for more communities and more species, then I think people would be more understanding and more supportive. It also makes scientists and policymakers more accountable and more obligated to communicate well.
That's the key.
Not just if I know the answer, but if I communicate the answer well, so that everybody can be
everybody can understand it. Like people say, make it plain. So that even the little children would understand why we are not supposed to go fish in this particular area right now. Yes, and I think that's the key, and I think that we get more scientists who do a lot of work like you do, because I notice your work is not purely scientific. I'm a scientist myself, a computer scientist and mathematician, and as you know, many of us get into geek speak, is what I like to call it. So we'll use just the terminology that the people within our particular range of science can understand. Or other scientists, we all understand each other. But the average person coming in that room now is wondering,
they don't know what those terms
what
are
they talking about?
And it starts getting good to us.
And it just takes off. That is not helpful. So like you say, effective communication means though the other folks could come in and they still can understand.
Because that you may communicate in a way that says, you know what, oh, okay, I understand you. I don't agree with you, but I understand what you're saying. You know? And so I don't fear you. I don't fear what you're saying because I get it. I just don't agree with you. And that's okay. That's very American. That's okay.
And the thing about it though, communication is two-way. You see, it's just like tide goes out and in, So we have to always have that, and I know that a lot of people in the Gullah Geechee community don't feel like they have that kind of in and out tidal flow of communication with policymakers, and especially with government agencies. You know, they feel like what happens is the scientists come in, they start talking this stuff, we don't know what they're saying, and then they leave. And then they write a report, and the next thing all we know is, you can't go out there. You see? So I think it's good that you have someone like yourself that's not only doing direct scientific work, but also what some might call looks like cultural anthropology.
Right.
By actually coming into communities and taking oral histories and having dialogues, because more often not, scientists again and doctors, as we know, we stand at the podium and we speak to everyone, and afterwards, okay, thank you for having me, and we're gone. And we don't dialogue, but I think the dialogue is what educates us all.
I think so. I think you're right.
Yeah, and I really hope that folks like you will continue to help educate us about the things we don't see. Because when we go to the beach, there are things that I watched you show that there's no way with just the human eye that we would see, but we're stepping on them. And we don't necessarily know we're stepping on them. Now I feel apologetic, like when I go to the beach. I'm sorry, you know, just coming here to hang out. I'm going to get something out the marsh. I'm like, oh, oops, sorry, hope I didn't damage your house, you know, that type of thing. But it's a good thing to know that, again, as big as we may seem to the little, like you mentioned, the eyelash worm and so on, that God put us all here for a purpose. That each one, that even that little eyelash worm has a connection to you and I, and that we need to make sure its environment is sustainable, because then it sustains all of us.
Yes.
So I really appreciate the work you're doing, and hope to have you back on Gullah Geechee TV.
Thank you.
Hopefully we actually go out there and apologize right, and actually can see some of the things that you use in your daily work to go out there and track what we would never think to track, because we weren't going to eat mud.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. So, Hunter Chillin, I know this your program. Y'all said, "Great God, I even know all that would be out there," but you know a little bit now, and Hunter can tune in and learn a little bit more. So, Hunter Chillin, know this year the what's going on, and this year the head on the body of this year Gullah Geechee Nation, Queen Quet. Peace and blessings.